Hello and welcome to another special episode of the India Leadership Council. And joining me are industry titans who will discuss about the importance of corporate governance and the crucial role that it plays in the Indian context, also the evolution of it here in India. Quick introduction of our esteemed panel. We have Mr. Narayana Murthy, the co-founder of Infosys. Dilipkumar Khandelwal, the CEO and MD of SAP Labs India. Satyakam, Arya, the MD and CEO of Daimler Commercial Vehicles. And of course, Amit Gossain, thank you so much for taking out the time, MD of Kone, India. Mr. Murthy, starting off with you, it can't be a more apt time for us to be discussing corporate governance, especially when we have seen the role of auditors being questioned. The SEBI has also come hard on a section of these auditors. What solace does this give to the layman investor who invests in companies, puts their hard-earned money and realizes there are issues that are really plaguing it?
There have been in the past, as you know, a few cases of serious violations which were not detected by the auditors. Therefore, it is appropriate that SEBI has indeed come out with some required changes, required actions, and therefore, it is likely to give a better level of confidence to the investors, to the shareholders, because after all, at the end of the day, the board of directors is elected by the shareholders, particularly the independent directors are elected by the shareholders, and it is their job to supervise the auditors. Therefore, I think that will enhance the confidence of the shareholders.
Dilip, we will share a lot more about the India context, but SAP Labs really being a global organization, multiple countries, is it more difficult for MNCs to also be on top of the compliance game, corporate governance game, especially when you're operating in different markets? The key is also, of course, being local in the markets that you operate. But is there a different challenge for MNCs in this sphere?
I think overall corporate governance actually doesn't matter whether you are an Indian firm or an MNC. The basic premise is about what kind of accountability you hold, what kind of fairness you bring in, what kind of sustainability you have, and also what kind of transparency you bring in. These are the four principles of corporate governance, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of MNCs have the similar thing. With regards to the specific to the country, it depends on really the local structures and the legal structure which defines the local governance. I tell you a simple example. In countries like Germany, you have the board, which is a dual system board, where you have a executive board, sure, which runs the operation of the company, and you have a supervisory board, which works on top just to make sure that there is which is basically the legal structure which is in place. And you have countries like India, or let's say the Western world in the US and all those things, where basically you have just one board and the chairman of the board is the CEO basically. So you have a lot of the structures which can be defined independently, but the core principles remain same. Every company needs to have a model where the relevant information is absolutely transparent. Mm-hmm. There is a right level of accountability being established. At all level there is a fairness being examined, and that's how it operates. So I think there is a lot of things to learn, but I think the basic principle, irrespective whether it is an MNC or Indian, it works on pure accountability, transparency, it works on fairness, and it works on sustainability. And you need to have a right governance in place at all level in a transparent way, so the right independent directors can also make decisions. And if they are not doing it, they need to be penalized.
Mr. Arya, something that we are discussing also, we've seen so many slip-ups over the last few months really. So what really is what's missing in the puzzle? Is there a need for a stronger regulations? One section suggests that there are enough regulations, implementation is the key. The other point of view really is the fact that there are considerable issues that need to be addressed. Where are we really getting it wrong?
Well, whenever something like that happens, I think it's very important that we question ourselves. So what is missing? And from my point of view, I think there is something missing on the regulatory side, but these are more some white spots which we have to address. But the bigger missing piece is, are the people living up to the standards which are already established? And I think there we have to do a lot of work. And this requires a very constructive collaboration between the regulatory body and the companies itself. And we should just sit down on the table, talk about real issues which we have found in these lapses and address them. I think that would be the way forward.
Mr. Gossain, just want to understand, and one section of the worry is also about how can corporate governance and ease of doing business coexist? Can they exist in tandem? Do you believe, that's true, or the fact that corporate governance, if you sort of get it right, also puts you on track, and your overall business also is really on track?
So I think the stronger the corporate governance, in my view, the ease of business is there. And what happens is, generally there is a myth that if you make it too stringent, then you are actually intervening too much in the business, if the corporate governance is too strong, and that affects the ease of business. But that is actually not true. It also comes back to the culture of the people, the culture of the management teams, and the culture of the whole country. I think that is where both these things marry, strong corporate governance and ease of doing business.
In fact, if I may just add to this point,
and I'll come to you.
Knowing the situation at hand in India, it will be good, I think, that we think about evolving a system of corporate governance credits for the companies who have over a long period of time established high levels of governance, and helping them in their ease of doing business, right? They could get some approvals on an easier term than any other company. So I think we should think about those kind of constructive mechanisms.
Mr. Murthy wanted to comment on that?
We can look at an analogy. In a country where the rules for driving on the road are well established and where people follow, it's easier to drive. Actually, as Mr. Gossain said, if there are good corporate governance rules, must be easier to do business. It's exactly like it's easier to drive in the West than in India, because here nobody cares about the rules. Therefore, as long as there are good rules of corporate governance and if people follow them, then it is easier to run the business.
So that sort of makes life easy for companies also. Yes,
I just wanted to add one more point here. In India there is this tendency to do jugaad, which works in a positive direction and a negative way as well.
Yeah,
because we start looking at loopholes in the system rather than filling it up. So once the rule's made, we start looking at a loophole, and that whole culture needs to change to actually fill that loophole, so that we are all following the same rules and processes, like Mr. Murthy said.
Mr. Murthy, whistleblower complaints is also very crucial. We've seen a lot of, the murk come out in the open because we had whistleblowers who sort of address. But do you think there's a need for more education about handling these complaints, also distinguishing them from frivolous complaints that sort of also make it, and the fact that they continue to play a very crucial role in unearthing a lot of what is going behind the scenes?
I don't think there should be any concern about whistleblower issue. We need whistleblowers. We need people to bring out the real issues, the real shenanigans that take place in companies. So therefore, we must protect whistleblowers. Then we must protect the anonymity of whistleblower. We must provide them full support. Absolutely.
Maybe one more comment on this. I think what Murthy said is right. I mean, it's about taking care of them if they raise something, and really making sure that they, at the same time,
every issue that comes through from a whistleblower is taken note of.
Should be examined.
Yes.
Because then it is fairness. The second most important thing is, I think, from an org and the size of the organization, when it becomes big, it's also actually very important that the awareness of this is known to all the employees, because it's just you're having a process and being known as a process. I think it's fantastic. And then once you have the whistleblower, and then you rightly make sure that this person, the whistleblower thing is examined, and you make sure that that the right thing's coming out, and then he is secured. He doesn't have any kind of, let's say, struggle or the repercussions because of what he has raised.
We are pretty young company in India, globally not very young, of course, and we started small. And what we put in place were the global Daimler governance mechanisms already in India, right? Because we believe if you are a multinational, you should follow your global standard, and if the local standard is a little bit lower, you should still go for the global one because that's easier for you. You can of course incorporate the unique things which the law of that country demands, right? And that's what we did. We have had our own experience with the whistleblower policy, and I think, as Mr. Murthy just mentioned, very important to have a effective governance mechanism behind. Very important to build awareness in the company about the rights of the whistleblower and to protect his interests. I think these are the learnings which we have gone through. You also have to invest time and money in making people aware and train them as to what their rights are and how should they go about it. I think that's another very important aspect which we should not forget.
Well, on that interesting note, let's slip into a smart commercial break. A lot more coming up on the other side. Thanks so much for staying on. Let's continue the conversation, especially considering it has become a very, very timely issue right now in the Indian context. Mr. Gossain, coming to the larger role, and of course all of you can pitch in, the larger role of the independent directors is very crucial at companies. You know, there have been talks and the government has also, fraction of government indicating there has to be exams that a board member has to clear to sort of be eligible for the board role. Of course, there are larger questions when board appointments are made. Would that really set some sort of a precedent, some sort of a culture, and the role of independent directors itself?
I think it's not a question of really exams. In my view, it's the ethical standards of the people who are selected as independent directors. A lot of companies do say that they are basically advisors at a very high level and there is a management team running the show. But they've taken on this the whole responsibility. So the accountability should also be with these independent directors. And if they are just advisors and then go, that probably is not fair, because I think they need to look at every aspect of the business and particularly the aspect that has been given to them, their role in that whole mechanism. So I think it's important that the ethical standards are there and they're monitoring. So the controls and control mechanism as well as the monitoring mechanism to them should be it's actually very important.
I think whenever we are talking about any professional responsibility, there are two important things. One is competence and the second is character. Character means integrity and will he perform his role as he should. When it comes to competence, we are talking about knowledge, experience and awareness. Does he know his responsibility? And I think there is definitely a strong need to build an effective qualification process for an independent director. I think that's also a missing piece which we talked about earlier.
All right.
I think that's a very important point.
As coming to you.
I am just extending what was said. For every position, you require 3 C's: competence, second character, and third commitment. That means hard work, all of that. After all, independent directors are supposed to be representatives of shareholders. They are supposed to ensure that the reputation of the corporation is protected. They are supposed to ensure that there are systems of control. They are supposed to ensure that there is proper budgeting. They are supposed to look at the financial statements and then certify them. They, based on, of course, the auditor certification and the recommendations of the audit committee. They are supposed to identify all risks and take action to mitigate them. Therefore, there is justification to train people, because many people may not have been trained in these areas. Therefore, training is fine, but more important is, if I did not exercise my responsibility as is expected, then I will have to pay a certain fine. I will have to be held accountable for that. If I did it wantonly. Therefore, the government has to establish, the regulatory agency has to establish whether the directors deliberately forgot to exercise their judgment. If they did, then there will have to be some kind of fine or so. They will have to be debarred from being independent directors for a certain period of time, and then they may have to undergo some additional training.
I just want to avoid that this is just a kind of checklist that I have cleared an exam. There has to be a bigger and larger qualification process behind, and then of course an exam is a step.
Maybe one more comment. I think so. Independent directors are really dependent. They're not in the main functioning of the company.
Yeah, so
they
how
are
do you
really
really hold
dependent
them
on the
accountable?
information which is shared with them or given to them, whoever give this information. So it's absolutely important that the information which is showed, given, based on which they are informed or they take a decision, are the right ones. I mean, in the sense, I mean, they have, that's why I said always a case of transparency, where all the things are known and transparent. And then once it is there, and if then they are not able to fulfill, then Mr. Murthy's comment is completely right, that then they need to be penalized for it.
And then we have to set a precedent also, which we haven't seen for the longest time in terms of holding people accountable and answer larger questions.
Our Indian culture is not known for holding people accountable. That is a flaw in our character. This has gone on for hundreds of years. This is nothing new, probably thousands of years. In this society, it is forbidden to talk about anything unpleasant. You cannot criticize anybody openly. You cannot say you cannot tell me that I did something wrong, even though you know that I did something wrong. Therefore, this change in our culture will require probably 1,000 years. So therefore, it will take a long time.
Where does this entire conversation really leave the investor, a shareholder who's putting his hard-earned money? There is of course enough disclosure, you have the right to ask questions, but he is also at the crossroads to really know. None of us knew that a public sector bank would have a massive scam of close to 10-15,000 crores out in the blue. So very few options for the shareholder to also determine where is the tide really flowing.
Yeah, so I think I touched upon it briefly in my initial comment. I think the investors are also getting very, very smart. I think they're very smart in terms of should I go into the company? I want to make sure that I know all the information of who are the people who are sitting on the advisory boards, or there's an independent director. What is the pedigree of the people? What is their reputations and all those stuff? Whether the company itself follows that entire mechanism of being accountable, transparent as a philosophy. Do they have a zero tolerance policy, which basically means if something goes wrong, I think there is no way but just to be out and to be rightly penalized. So I think the investor, whether it is investing in a small company or a big company, is getting much more smarter. And I think, of course, they look for also more information and to get it right in the way of investment. So I think you just see a lot of people are getting much more smarter. I invest in a lot of things, and I'm just very clear that I invest into right kind of people and right kind of companies, which is going to be ethical, which is going to be smart, but also making sure that there is a right level of governance, because it's very simple. The trust and the governance is built in step-by-step approach, and it is lost very, very fast. It can lose, you can lose in a single day. That's why the foundation has to be very strong.
Yeah, and one as an active shareholder should sort of very closely track that and ensure that you're on the pulse of the things. You want to add some?
And in a way, sometimes these kind of disruptions are helpful, because this will further increase transparency, will lead to some more mechanisms being built on accountability, and will therefore help the investors in the long run.
There is a very simple mechanism for independent directors, for chairman of the company, chairman of the audit committee, remuneration committee, everybody, and of course for the executive management. to ensure that governance is proper, to ensure that there are no risks to the corporation, to ensure that corporation remains trustworthy. That is, before taking any decision, ask this question: will my decision enhance respect for me and my company in the eyes of all the stakeholders? If you ask that question before you take any decision, then let me assure you there will be no problems of corporate governance. All the problems of corporate governance that we have seen in various corporations that we have discussed have come about simply because nobody asked this question: will my decision enhance respect for me and my company? That's all.
That sort of sets the trend. Okay, quick round of closing comments. I'll come with you. And
Okay, I'd just like to just add one more point, which is to do with human resources, manpower, very important subject. But I think in all this corporate governance, the employee engagement is absolutely important. Transparent employee engagement. I feel happy employees.
With your employees.
It starts with from them and then goes on, and therefore the ethical management standards are very important. Happy employees is equal to happy customers is equal to happy stakeholders. So that's what I'd like to
It all begins with the employees.
Just 2 points to quickly add. First one, build it in your culture. That's the most sustainable way to have effective corporate governance. And second thing is, if you ask a deeper question on why do these things happen, I think we also need to look at the KPIs which the management is responsible for. Is it only the profit? Is it only in short term? Or is it something which you are going to build sustainably in long term? And therefore, there is a need to also look at that.
Dilip, quick closing.
Doesn't matter if you're small, big, or MNCs or local.
Keep this as
The basics are same. It's accountability, fairness. It's pretty simple. Have a zero tolerance policy for failure.
This works across the board. Any country that you operate in, doesn't matter. Mr. Murthy, quick closing comments.
Well, the best way to earn the trust of stakeholders in the company is to lead by example. Whether it is transparency, fairness, accountability, austerity, in every one of these areas, hard work, whatever it is, if the leaders lead by example, then everybody else will follow them. Your actions speak louder than your words. Therefore, the most important thing, as Mahatma Gandhi said, is for us to lead by example.
And sort of set that as a strong cultural intake for the company. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. The broad takeaways really being that irrespective of it really being a small or a multinational company, the culture of the company largely defines corporate governance norms. Employees are key, and also the role of independent directors is very crucial in the long haul. A lot of takeaways really from the India context. Thank you all again for taking out the time and joining us. Stay tuned to ET Now for more news and updates.